This episode is brought to you by Peacock. The new Peacock original documentary, Matthew Perry, A Hollywood Tragedy, dives deep into the beloved actor's rise to fame and his tragic death. 5 people, including Perry's personal assistant, 2 medical doctors, and an alleged Hollywood drug dealer known as the Ketamine Queen, were charged with conspiracy to illegally provide Perry with the ketamine. Explore the details of the case in this heartbreaking special, streaming now only on Peacock.
Today on CityCast DC, Congressman Jamie Raskin is known nationally for leading some of the Democratic pushback against DOGE and the sweeping cuts to the federal government. Around here, he's also known as the lawmaker who actually represents a lot of the people who feel most threatened by the new Trump era. Raskin represents Bethesda, Silver Spring, and a bunch of other Maryland suburbs. He's with me today to talk about how the cuts are affecting the DMV, how his Republican colleagues really see DC home rule, and what he tells citizens they ought to do if they want to get involved. Oh, and after the interview, we've got a special treat from our sponsor, Alliance Française. Stick around for a quick teaser of a full episode coming out in a few hours. It's about the weirdly long history of French stuff in D.C. Today is Monday, March 10th. I'm Michael Schaefer, and here's what D.C. is talking about. Hey, Congressman, thank you for being here.
It is my absolute pleasure, Michael.
So can you give us a rough sense of what DOGE and Trump have done in your district so far? Like how many people are out of work, how many people feel that they're in danger, what the vibe is?
Well, the last time I can remember anything remotely comparable to this, I suppose, was COVID-19, which was devastating for our district as well as for the state of Maryland and people all over the country. But this is just a calamity for thousands of federal workers who've been summarily discharged, demoted, put on administrative leave. They've had their professional lives, their professional passions, their personal calling, their family lives, their financial livelihood thrown into absolute turmoil. At the same time that they're anxious about what's happening to everybody else.
And, historically, the truism is like when the federal jobs go down, contracting jobs go up, but that doesn't seem to be the case here either.
Yeah, it's not just federal workers, it's private contractors. I mean, they were hit very hard at the beginning at the Agency for International Development, but it has attacked a huge community of private contractors. Many of them are not-for-profits. Some of them are for-profits in my district.
So what do you see happening to the DMV if this continues? There is talk of we are going to head into a region-specific depression. Does that square with what you're seeing?
If they get away with everything they want to do, there will be a huge economic collapse in the country. There's no doubt. But I think that that's nationwide. Maybe it hits us first because of the terrible attack on federal workers and private contractors, but it will be seen all over America.
So you're also a longtime advocate for DC statehood and for defending home rule and expanding it to statehood. Some of your colleagues want to end home rule. What do you see happening? Well,
first of all, I'm glad that statehood is at least back on the table. They're talking about it for Greenland, Canada, and Panama. Actually, I'm not sure they've mentioned statehood for Panama. Of course, none of those jurisdictions have shown the least bit of interest in becoming states in the United States of America. The 2 entities that we need to make states are Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico. We've got 713,000 tax-paying draftable citizens in Washington, D.C. who are completely locked out of voting in the Senate and the House. And we can see right now the fundamental importance of being represented. Instead, they're talking about taking over Washington and, abolishing the mayor and the council and having Donald Trump run it the way he's running the Kennedy Center. We've got to rectify that. That's a for real political agenda.
So looking at it from a Washingtonian's perspective, historically, the conventional wisdom has been, they bluster up on the Hill against D.C., but at the end of the day, they don't want to be dealing with dog poop in Cleveland Park or, whatever a city government has to deal with. My questions are, one, do you think your colleagues actually do want to deal with that? And what would it look like? What kind of setup are they imagining for like who gets the roads paved?
No, it's far more serious. It's far more serious this time. In fact, I was glad that Donald Trump, in his endless, interminable, protracted State of the Union joint session address, didn't get into this. That's the best news I've heard for our friends in D.C. so far, because they've really been pretty avid about it. But no, I do think it's a serious problem for several reasons. One is Donald Trump operates obviously out of pique and rage and retribution and revenge. And, he cannot get over the fact that the people of DC voted 90% for Kamala Harris. So he views it as enemy territory and would like to govern it as like an occupied district, right? That's one problem. A second problem is that they are clearly in the market to wipe out as many jobs as possible for people that they do not see as like-minded, and then to install their own people in those jobs. And I'm sure that they would consider that quite a plum assignment for some, 20 or 30 something authoritarians to get to take over the District of Columbia. And I'm sure that there are people, lining up for that prospect. And the last thing is that they understand that their policies are enormously unpopular and are going to lead to widespread protest. They've already led to huge protests, kind of these pop-up one-a-day rallies that are organized in a 24-hour period. But those are like, 2,000 people, 3,000, 4,000, something like that. But if this continues, there will be marches the size of the Women's March coming to Washington to protest. There's that much pervasive anger in the country about it. And I think they want to have control over the police power in the District of Columbia.
Have you talked to Mayor Bowser or Delegate Norton about this and what kind of support you could offer?
Well, yeah. I mean, I've spoken, obviously, continuously to my friends in D.C., and I know it's everybody's second best solution in D.C. People want statehood, and it was my honor to be a floor leader for statehood and to round up real votes for statehood. Sorry our friend Mark Plotkin wasn't around to see all the Democrats vote for statehood in the House and for us to pass it in the 118th and 117th Congresses. But I saw Mayor Bowser and I said, if you guys want to think about coming back to Maryland for this period, you will definitely be safer in the Free State than you'll be under the brutal thumb of MAGA colonialism, But anyway, she took it under advisement. I think, it's a reasonable position to say that people will stick it out through this brutal period and, live to fight another day for DC statehood. But there's obviously nothing moving on that with the Republicans in control of the House, the Senate, and the White House.
So I want to ask you about that brutality, because you are a former constitutional law professor. I think the big question on everyone's minds, right, that I hear a lot is, can Trump really do what he's doing and what the Constitution says? Can he take over D.C.?
There are more than 100 lawsuits that have been filed, Mike, and we have now temporary restraining orders or preliminary injunctions in more than 35 of them.
When you say we, is that because you're involved in the suits?
Well, we have a rapid response team in the House of Representatives, and I, as the ranking Democrat on the Judiciary Committee, I head up the legal working group. And this is for mostly amicus briefs, because it's very hard for members of Congress to get standing according to Supreme Court doctrine. So it's mostly amicus briefs, but also we could intervene in some suits. And I do think that there are a handful where we actually could achieve standing ourselves and become the lead plaintiff. But in any event, we just filed an amicus brief on Friday in the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau case, which is all about basically they're trying to abolish the CFPB or drain it of all meaning by redirecting 90% of the money. And incidentally, there are dozens of cases that have actually been settled by CFPB lawyers with hundreds of millions of dollars at stake, ready to go out in checks to American consumers who've been ripped off in various scams. That's just frozen and sitting there because all of the workers have been told they can't do any work.
So it's their contention that they can sit there and not send them, and it's yours that actually you got to send them.
They've got to send them. And we're winning on that. Look, in that case, that's money that has already been settled between the wrongdoer and the government. And all that needs to be done is for these government workers to give it the green light, but they're not allowed to log into their computers. They're not allowed to make a phone call. It's ridiculous. But we're winning even on the bigger question of whether they can freeze federal funds generally. Like the Supreme Court in a 5-4 decision, should have been 9-0, but 5-4 decision yesterday said that the AID funding could not be unilaterally and arbitrarily frozen by the Doge group, and that money had to be released in order to pay private contractors who are waiting for payment on existing contracts in the final quarter of 2024 and for January and February of this year. So basically, we're winning in these cases. I could come back and I'd give you an hour-long seminar on all the cases, but basically, it's about Congress's lawmaking power, Congress's spending power, the rights of federal workers not to be mistreated because of their political party affiliation or their non-affiliation with MAGA and with Donald Trump, and their right to all of the rights that are guaranteed to them under the civil service. I mean, the core right of the civil service is that you can only be demoted or fired or disciplined if you engage in professional misconduct or poor work performance. These are people who have superior work evaluations.
Only 2 residences remain at Ebenezer Row, Capitol Hill's premier new construction condominiums. These spacious 2-bedroom, 2.5 baths are graciously sized to meet your needs and artfully refined to match your style, priced from $1 million. With a walk score of 97, you're just steps from Eastern Market, Barracks Row, and Navy Yard, plus 2 metro stops for seamless city access. Don't miss this rare opportunity to own in one of DC's most coveted neighborhoods. Visit EbenezerRow.com to schedule your private tour today.
Hey, Fidelity. What's it cost to invest with the Fidelity app?
Start with as little as $1 with no account fees or trade commissions on U.S. stocks and ETFs.
That's music to my ears.
I can only talk.
Investing involves risk, including risk of loss. Zero account fees apply to retail brokerage accounts only. Sell order assessment fee not included. A limited number of ETFs are subject to a transaction-based service fee of $100. See full list at fidelity.com/commissions. Fidelity Brokerage Services, LLC, member NYSE, SIPC.
So what about on the takeover of DC? There's not a lot of court recourse there in the Constitution.
Well, the Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17 gives Congress the right to exercise exclusive legislation over the district that is to become the seat of government. So the district has suffered and labored under different forms of government. Immediately before Home Rule was adopted in 1973, it was this commissioner form of government where Congress legislated for the commissioner government, and the president appointed people to be commissioners and just run it like a federal department. But still, even if that happens, the rest of the Constitution still applies. The president can't establish a church in D.C. The president can't shut down the newspapers in D.C. Of course, he's come close to trying to do all that kind of stuff. But the due process applies, equal protection applies, and so on. Again, all those things under attack and under assault. They're doing everything they can to shut down the opposition. And so, although the Constitution would apply in the District of Columbia, if they were to take over DC and run it as some sort of presidential commission or some sort of monarchical thing. Trump decided he wants to be the head of the Kennedy Center, right? So he views the DC basically as an extension of the Kennedy Center. He could run it himself and then appoint some underlings to do it the way they centralize power. I could see them doing that. And I really could see them trying to shut down political opponents, newspapers.
So you're taking lead in these lawsuits. Your constituents, they elected you to do stuff. Why do you think there is this malaise from a lot of Democrats about the possibility of effectively pushing back against this?
I just disagree with the premise of that, Mike. I don't think there's a malaise. I think that every member of Congress feels the sense of passionate urgency that I do about this. I mean, maybe I got it a little bit more because, I've got 55,000 federal workers and tens of thousands more retired federal workers in my district and all the contractors. And so we're right up close. And also a lot of my colleagues have been back at home when some of these things have happened, but I'm right here so I can get right down to NOAA or CFPB or AID to protest with people. And my motto for this period is a rally a day keeps the fascists away. The problem is that it's always hard to know what exactly to do. And because we're in the minority, we've got to use the statutes we passed before in prior Congresses to try to defend the workers and defend the beneficiaries of federal programs. We're not going to be able to pass new stuff. But that's why today I'm spending time with the Privacy Act. And I'm planning to just go ahead and write a letter to DOJ saying, I want to know all the information, all the data you've got on me, my IRS data, my Social Security data, my college student loan data. I want all of it. I've got a right to that under the Privacy Act. And I want to know if it's been compromised in any way, if it's been given to any third party like Elon Musk's artificial intelligence program. And I want to know if it's been doctored in any way, if anybody's changed it. And I'm going to put that up online. And I hope everybody gets the idea. I'm not the only person who can do that. There are 340 million people in America who can say, I want to know what DOJ is doing with my private data.
So privacy is the kind of thing I can imagine really galvanizing people. Some of the other protests, I think the Republicans were very happy to see them, like, the USAID protests. They were able to say, aha, look at these elites who just want to give your money away to foreign countries. Now,
Yeah, that was a big joke until they realized that American farmers in South Dakota and Wisconsin and Florida and Texas and Maryland are now going to lose $2 billion in contracts they have with the federal government to take that food to send it to starving people around the world. And there were millions of tons of that food that was just left sitting there to rot as soon as Elon Musk started this ridiculous venture of his as the fourth branch of government. So, yeah, it might seem like certain things are more vulnerable. Some people say, well, the LGBTQ community, what is that? Like 2 or 3% of the public. But then you add in their families and you add in their friends and there is a sense of solidarity. And all of these federal programs touch people in different ways.
The other thing about the USAID protests is those are workers. And I think that this idea of convincing the rest of the country who maybe don't know that your constituents are, they're workers who deal with jerky bosses just the same as somebody in a city without much government employment. Rhetorically, your political leader, how do you do that?
You've got to look at what the purpose and the meaning of the programs are. I mean, what are the USAID personnel and the private contractors doing? They are fighting HIV/AIDS. They're fighting measles around the world. They're fighting dysentery around the world. They are distributing malaria nets and malaria education around the world. So yeah, it might be a big joke to people. It's fine. Let's have a $900 billion defense budget and let's cut $40 billion in foreign aid. You forget that the whole world is a fairly intimate neighborhood. I mean, we saw that during COVID-19. We've got an interest in stopping malaria and HIV and AIDS and all kinds of new diseases that will be out there if we're not actually fighting them. And don't forget, USAID used to be attacked, not the way it's being attacked now, but it used to be attacked politically by the left because it was considered a Cold War program. And John F. Kennedy, when he started it and Congress began to fund it and establish it, said that we need this to keep the world on our side. Otherwise, our enemies are going to move in and influence people with soft power. And sure enough, China and Russia are both doing that now. They were just uncorking the champagne bottles when Elon Musk decided to destroy USAID.
So let me ask you one more question, on the local side. At least in my neighborhood, I live on a 1-block street, and people are really, freaking out. There's just people aren't sleeping well. There's a lot of concern. I wonder, what do you say to folks? What do you tell them to do in this moment?
First of all, I share their condition. I mean, I think there's a kind of political mass insomnia that has set in. I mean, it's definitely difficult to sleep. I think about, Macbeth doth kill sleep. I mean, MAGA's been killing sleep big time for people. People understand that we've been through this kind of stuff before. We've been through it before in the first Trump administration. There are Americans who live in the 8th District, who grew up under Jim Crow apartheid in the South. There are women who remember what it was like when they couldn't get an abortion, not just in one part of the country, but anywhere in the country. So the civilizing movements of our time have always opposed the kind of authoritarianism that we see today, whether directed at African Americans, whether directed at women, whether directed at immigrants. And so we are battle hardened and we're battle ready. We're ready to do this. But when people ask, what can I do? I say, there's a million things you can do. And we're going to get in touch. The first thing we can do is create communications networks so we know how to find each other. But in order for you to be effective, for any of us to be effective, I'm speaking to myself as much as anybody else, everybody's got to take care of themselves and their families and their friends. This is not a 2-day struggle. This is not a 2-week struggle or a 2-month or even a 2-year struggle. I'm hoping that we get to the 2026 elections, we will be able to cut this reign of terror in half. And we need to do that. But even then, it's not over, right? So people need to take care of themselves, because the real fork in the road is not 2 bad choices from Elon Musk about what the federal workers should do. The real fork in the road is between democracy and dictatorship under this new techno elite that is emerging with Silicon Valley and Elon Musk. And that's a global struggle that we're going to be part of, because all the autocrats have found each other. Putin in Russia and Orban in Hungary and Xi in China and Trump here, they're all working together. And we need transnational movements of democratic solidarity for human rights and for freedom against these people. And we need people for the long haul to be engaged in this.
So I know that you were involved in organizing this a teach-in about what people can do. What do people need to know about their rights or their abilities? And I'm not just talking about workers who've been laid off, but the guy who works at the coffee shop and wants to help his neighbors.
Well, I started this a long time ago, Mike. I wrote a book for young people called We the Students, which is about how the Constitution affects kids in public schools, locker searches and drug testing and censorship of newspapers and yearbooks, and how to know your rights, how to defend your rights, and how to stand up for the Constitution. And I think that the Trump, Vance, Musk regime has been preying on a lot of civic illiteracy in the country, a lot of people not knowing the Constitution, not knowing our history, not knowing our rights. So, this whole process of defending our control over our own data under the Privacy Act and getting information about what government is doing under FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act, and defending people's free speech rights under the First Amendment and veterans' rights and so on, is the process of educating people about what those rights are.
In Project 2025, that same theory that they've used on the Department of Defense schools, they also suggest that theory would be valid against DC public schools.
I can totally see that coming. They will want to, review what books are available to kids in the library. And again, we're not even talking about books that are part of an official curriculum. We're just talking about what books are allowed to be in the library. That's how all the authoritarian and fascist regimes get started. They start declaring particular books off limits, like To Kill a Mockingbird or The Handmaid's Tale. I mean, the first books that get censored, I've noticed, are the books about censorship and authoritarianism. It's 1984 by George Orwell, and it's The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. And I mean, that's a great reading list if you start with those books. And those are precisely the books they write.
If you had one piece of advice for us in the DMV, what would it be?
Let me start with my constituents in Maryland, who've been hit hard by the attack on science funding at NIH, the attack on federal funding of a lot of programs, because we have a lot of not-for-profits and consultants in Montgomery County, and then the attack on federal workers. People have got to stick together and be involved with the unions and the trade associations and the individuals who've brought litigation. We are winning in court, and we're going to continue to win in court. I think Trump is gambling that they can lose with all the real judges, but then they'll get to Trump's hand-picked, stacked and packed and gerrymandered Supreme Court, and then Thomas and Alito will rush to his rescue. But we saw a majority, a slender majority, it's true, but a majority nonetheless of 5-4 this week rebuke them and say that $2 billion that had been pocket vetoed by Elon Musk and Doge for aid private contractors needed to be released. So I am cautiously optimistic there, but I'm feeling very optimistic about what's happening at the district court level and at the appeals court level, and people have got to stay focused on that. Popular protest is essential. I've met with some people who are specialists in how democratic peoples defeat authoritarian coups and totalitarian takeovers and right-wing insurrections. The critical thing is that it cannot just be a legislative parliamentary battle. It's got to be a union between people in legislative office with people in the streets and the towns and the counties and the state legislatures all over the country. That's going to be the critical factor, popular engagement. And it's no guarantee then, but something like 60 or 70% of the democratic societies that are the target of authoritarian takeover can get out of it if there is an engaged, alive, vigilant citizenry working with effective people in public office. And so we've got to struggle to be as effective as we can be. And I'm certainly working straight through the weekend every week. But we also need the civil society to stand up too. And I'm glad to see it's happening everywhere.
Congressman, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Mike. Hang tough, you guys. Thanks for what you're doing.
And listener, don't go anywhere. In just a second, we've got a 2-minute sneak peek into a bonus episode coming out later today. Our sponsor, Alliance Française, has all kinds of fascinating insights into DC's relationship with French culture. In this clip, Executive Director Sarah Diligenty shares her organization's unexpected origin story.
Well, Alliance Française, when it was first created, probably was more of a social club and a place where a lot of American gentry or American aristocracy, if I can say that, they all spoke French, okay? They all spoke French, including Marjorie Marie Weatherpost, you know, and the Anderson from Anderson House, Lars and his wife, Isabel Gardner. Everybody who was anybody in DC until, I would say, the 1940s and even in the 1960s spoke French. So there was always this fascination, like you said, with everything French. And we maintain the language and the social events at Alliance Française. But then in the 70s, there was a little change, not so much because of the Americans, but because the French created their own Ministry of Culture, and therefore culture became an instrument, a weapon of soft power, a soft diplomacy of the French government, whilst Alliance Française is a non-governmental non-profit. So it's not linked with the French government. And therefore, we became a little bit freer in terms of what we could actually organize in terms of events, but at the same time, we lost influence a little bit. We haven't lost it completely, but it's been eroded, I would say, and we need to always maintain and fight for our visibility.
Once again, that was a clip from our upcoming bonus episode with our sponsor, Alliance Française. Keep an eye on your podcast feed for that to drop later today. And that's all for today here on CityCast DC. If you enjoyed the show, please leave us a review on whatever podcast app you're using. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye.